The blood came too early, and with it all of Sarah McKenna's dreams died on a cold February morning in 1877 in a wooden shack outside Deadwood, Dakota Territory, where the wind howled through gaps in the timber walls and no amount of fire could chase away the chill that had settled deep into her bones. She had been 7 months along, far enough to feel the baby move and kick, far enough to have chosen names and imagined tiny fingers wrapped around hers, but not far enough for the child to draw breath in this harsh world that took more than it gave. The midwife had wrapped the tiny body in clean linen before Sarah could see whether she had been carrying the son or daughter she would never know. And perhaps that was a mercy. Though Sarah felt no mercy in any of this. Her husband Jacob had been dead 3 months now, shot down during a claim dispute over a worthless strip of land that had yielded nothing but heartache. And now this baby, this last piece of him, was gone too. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out, a shell of a woman lying in blood-soaked sheets while the midwife cleaned and fussed and spoke words that meant nothing. "You rest now, Mrs. McKenna," the older woman said, her face lined with the weariness of witnessing too much sorrow. "Your body needs time to heal." But Sarah knew some things never healed. Some losses carved themselves so deep into your soul that you carried them forever, weight upon weight until you could barely stand. She turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes, wishing she could close her ears to the sound of the midwife moving around the small room, wishing she could stop existing entirely because the pain of being alive was too much to bear. The midwife left before sunset, and Sarah was alone with a silence so complete it felt like drowning. She had no family left in Deadwood, no close friends, just neighbors who had their own struggles and barely enough charity to spare a kind word. Jacob's claim was hers now, legally. But what good was land when you had no strength to work it and no reason to try? The small stash of money they had saved was nearly gone, spent on the doctor who could not save Jacob and the midwife who could not save the baby. She must have slept, though sleep felt no different from waking in those first dark hours. When dawn came, gray and reluctant through the single window, Sarah forced herself to sit up despite the pain that lanced through her body. The linen bundle sat on the small table across the room, impossibly tiny, impossibly still. The midwife had said she would arrange for burial, but Sarah could not bear the thought of her baby going into the ground without her, could not stand the idea of this child being forgotten as though it had never existed at all. With shaking legs, she stood clutching the wall for support. Every step toward the table felt like walking through deep water, her body heavy and uncooperative, but she made it across the room and gathered the bundle in her arms. It weighed almost nothing. That was what broke her finally, that terrible lightness, and she sank to the floor holding her baby and wept until no more tears would come. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to her grief. Eventually, Sarah knew she had to do something, had to give this child some dignity, some acknowledgement that it had been real and wanted and loved, even if its time had been measured in months instead of years. She wrapped herself in Jacob's old coat, far too large for her diminished frame, and carried the bundle outside into the sharp winter air. The ground behind the shack was frozen solid, impossible to dig without tools and strength she did not possess. Sarah stood there helplessly, the wind cutting through the coat, her arms aching with the effort of holding even such a small burden. She had no idea what to do, no plan beyond the desperate need to do something, anything to mark this loss. "Ma'am?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the bundle. She spun around to find a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands, his face shadowed by several days' worth of beard. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a sheepskin jacket, a cowboy by the look of him, probably passing through on his way to somewhere else like everyone did in this godforsaken place. "I am sorry to intrude," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "I was riding past and saw you standing out here. Are you all right?" It was such an absurd question that Sarah almost laughed. except she had forgotten how. "No," she said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, scraped raw from crying. "No, I am not all right." His eyes moved to the bundle in her arms. An understanding dawned across his weathered face. He was perhaps 30, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun, and something in his expression suggested he knew what grief looked like because he had worn it himself. "I am sorry," he said again. And this time, the words carried weight. He put his hat back on and turned as if to leave, giving her privacy, but then he paused. "The ground is too frozen for digging. You will need a pickaxe to break through, and even then it will take hours. If you want, I can help." Sarah stared at him. She did not know this man, had never seen him before in her life, and yet here he was offering to spend hours breaking frozen ground for a stranger's grief. "Why would you do that?" He met her eyes, and she saw something old and sad in them. "Because somebody should, because it matters, because I know what it is like to lose something precious and have nobody care enough to help you mourn it." The words hung in the cold air between them. Sarah knew she should send him away, should tell him she could manage alone, even though she obviously could not. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying everything by herself. "I cannot pay you," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I am not asking for payment, ma'am. I am offering help. There is a difference." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and watched as he walked back toward the road where a sturdy buckskin horse waited patiently. He retrieved something from his saddlebags and returned with a pickaxe and a shovel, tools that looked well used and carefully maintained. Without another word, he began the hard work of breaking ground. Sarah went back inside because her body was giving out, but she laid the bundle gently on the table and returned to the doorway to watch. The cowboy swung the pickaxe with steady rhythm, each blow chipping away at the frozen earth with a sound like breaking stone. It was brutal work, exhausting work, and yet he did not stop or complain. She saw him pause once to shed his jacket, saw the sweat darkening his shirt despite the cold, saw the determination in every movement. Hours passed. Sarah made coffee on her small stove because it was something to do, something to offer. And when she brought a cup outside, the cowboy accepted it gratefully and drank it black without comment, even though it was bitter from sitting too long on the heat. He had made progress, a dark wound in the pale, frozen earth, but it was still not deep enough. "What is your name?" Sarah asked, because it seemed wrong not to know the name of the man doing this thing for her. "Thomas Brennan, ma'am. Most people call me Tom." "Sarah McKenna. And you do not have to call me ma'am. I'm not much older than a girl." He nodded, his eyes kind. "All right then, Sarah. I will have this ready before dark. You should go inside and rest. You look like you have been through hell." "I have been," she said simply, and went back inside because he was right. Her body was screaming for rest, even though rest felt like surrender. When she looked out again later, Tom was using the shovel, which meant he had broken through the worst of the frozen layer. The hole was taking shape now, small and narrow, the right size for what it would hold. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. Gratitude and sorrow mixed so thoroughly she could not tell them apart. As the sun began its descent, Tom climbed out of the grave he had dug and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, his hands raw despite the gloves he wore. Then he did something Sarah had not expected. He walked to a stand of pine trees at the edge of her property and selected 2 fallen branches, testing their weight and straightness. Using a knife from his belt, he stripped away the bark and smaller twigs, then lashed the branches together with a length of cord to form a cross. It was rough work, simple and unadorned, but it was made with care, and when he planted it at the head of the small grave, it stood straight and strong against the darkening sky. He came to the door then, knocked softly. "It is ready, if you want to bring the baby out, or I can do it for you if it is too hard." Sarah shook her head. This was something she needed to do herself. She wrapped the bundle in another layer of cloth, the softest fabric she owned, and carried it outside one last time. Tom stood beside the grave, his head bowed respectfully, and when Sarah knelt at the edge with the tiny body in her arms, he knelt beside her. "I do not know any prayers," Sarah whispered, staring down into the dark earth that would be her baby's resting place. "Jacob was not a religious man, and I lost my faith a long time ago." "Then just say what is in your heart," Tom said quietly. "That is prayer enough." Sarah looked down at the bundle, at the small shape that should have been a child running and laughing and growing up to have a life full of all the things she would never now experience. "I loved you," she said, her voice breaking. "I loved you before I ever met you, and I will love you until the day I die. I am sorry I could not keep you safe. I am sorry this world was too harsh and you were too small and everything went wrong. You deserved better. You deserved everything." Tears were streaming down her face, but she made herself continue. "Your father would have loved you too. He was a good man, stubborn and brave and too foolish to back down from a fight, and he died before he could know about you. I wish you could have met him. I wish so many things, but wishing changes nothing. I just want you to know that you mattered. Your life mattered, even though it was so short. You will always matter to me." She could not say anything more. Tom reached out and gently took the bundle from her arms, and with a tenderness that made Sarah's heart ache, he lowered it into the grave. When it rested at the bottom, he helped Sarah to her feet because her legs would not work properly, and together they stood there in the gathering dusk. "Would you like to say something?" Sarah asked him, not sure why it felt important, but knowing somehow that it did. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the grave, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I had a daughter once. She was 3 years old when the fever took her up in Montana. That was 5 years ago now, but I remember everything about her. The way she laughed, the way she held my hand when we walked, the way she called me Papa. Her name was Emma, and losing her nearly killed me. It did kill my marriage because my wife and I could not look at each other without seeing what we had lost. And eventually she left, and I started writing, trying to outrun the grief even though I knew I could not." He lifted his eyes to Sarah's, and she saw tears on his cheeks. "I am telling you this because I want you to know that you are not alone in this pain. I want you to know that I understand why this matters, why every small life deserves to be mourned and remembered. And I want you to know that you will survive this, even though right now you cannot imagine how. The grief does not go away, but you learn to carry it, and eventually you can carry other things too. Joy and hope and reasons to keep living. It takes time, but it happens." Sarah felt something shift inside her, some small measure of comfort in knowing that this stranger understood, that he was not just performing a duty, but genuinely mourning with her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping me. Thank you for understanding." "It is what people should do for each other," Tom said, "even if they do not always." Together they filled in the grave, the earth falling soft and dark over the white bundle until it disappeared from view. When it was done, Tom packed the soil down carefully and made sure the cross stood firm. The last light was fading from the sky, stars beginning to appear in the vast expanse above them, cold and distant and eternal. "You should not be alone tonight," Tom said as they walked back toward the shack. "Is there someone I can fetch for you, a friend or neighbor?" Sarah shook her head. "There is no one. It is just me now." Tom frowned, clearly troubled by this. "I do not like the idea of leaving you by yourself, not after what you have been through. Would you be all right with me camping nearby just for tonight? I will stay outside, give you your privacy, but I will be close if you need anything." Part of Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her solitude because it was all she knew now, but a larger part of her was terrified of being alone with her grief in the dark hours of the night. "All right," she said. "There is a lean-to attached to the shack where you can sleep. It is not much, but it will keep the wind off. And you should have dinner, after all that work. I do not have much, but I can make stew." "You do not need to feed me," Tom said, but Sarah was already shaking her head. "You dug a grave and built a cross and mourned with me. The least I can do is feed you a meal, please." He agreed, and while Sarah put together a simple stew from salt pork and root vegetables, Tom took care of his horse and set up his bedroll in the lean-to. The shack felt less empty with another person moving around outside, and when they sat down to eat at her small table, Sarah found she had more appetite than she expected. The food was plain but hot, and Tom ate like a man who had been working hard all day, which he had. "Where were you heading when you stopped here?" Sarah asked, needing conversation to fill the silence that felt too heavy. "Nowhere in particular," Tom admitted. "I've been drifting for a while now, picking up work where I can find it. I was up in the Black Hills looking for ranch work, but there's not much hiring this time of year. I thought I might head south toward Cheyenne, see if anything opens up there." "You are a cowboy then?" "Most of my life, yes. Grew up on a ranch in Texas. Learned to ride before I could properly walk. Worked trail drives for years, then tried to settle down in Montana with my wife and daughter. After they were gone, I went back to what I knew. It is easier to keep moving than to stay still and remember." Sarah understood that impulse. If she had anywhere to go, she might have done the same thing. "I came here with my husband last year. He had dreams of striking it rich with a mining claim, but those dreams died in the dirt along with him. Now I have this shack and a worthless piece of land and no idea what comes next." "Do you have family back wherever you came from?" "Ohio originally, but no family. My parents died when I was young and my brother went west before I did. I do not know where he ended up or if he is even alive. Jacob was all I had, and then the baby, and now there is nothing." The bleakness of her situation seemed to settle over the room. Tom looked troubled, and Sarah could see him working through something in his mind. Finally, he said, "I know we just met, and I have no right to offer advice, but you should think about what you want to do now. This place is isolated, and winter is hard up here. If you have no reason to stay, you might consider moving somewhere with more opportunities, more people." "With what money?" Sarah asked, not bitterly, but simply stating fact. "I have maybe $20 left to my name. That will not get me far, and I cannot sell this claim because nobody wants it." Tom nodded slowly, acknowledging the problem. They finished their meal in silence, and then he helped her clean up despite her protests. When everything was put away, he said goodnight and headed out to the lean-to, leaving Sarah alone in the shack that felt even emptier now that she had experienced the comfort of company. She lay in her bed, her body aching from the trauma it had endured, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the occasional sound of Tom moving around, settling in for the night, and somehow that was comforting. For the first time since losing the baby, she did not feel completely alone in her grief. Someone had witnessed her loss, had honored it with hard work and genuine tears, and that made it real in a way it had not been when she was suffering in isolation. Sleep came eventually, dark and dreamless, and when Sarah woke to gray morning light, she felt marginally stronger. Her body still hurt, but the worst of the physical pain had eased. The emotional pain was another matter entirely, a constant weight pressing down on her chest, but at least she could get out of bed without feeling like she might collapse. She found Tom already up, tending to a small fire he had built outside. He had coffee brewing in a battered pot, and when he saw her, he poured a cup and brought it over. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like I have been hollowed out and refilled with stones," Sarah said honestly. "But better than yesterday. Thank you for staying." "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "I was thinking about your situation, and I have a proposition if you're willing to hear it." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup and waited. "I am not trying to be forward or improper," Tom said carefully, "but you need help, and I'm in a position to offer it. What if I stayed on for a bit, helped you get things sorted out? I could fix up this shack, make it more weatherproof, help you figure out what to do with the claim. In exchange, you could provide meals and a place to sleep. Nothing more than that, just practical help until you were back on your feet." Sarah studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. He met her eyes steadily, and she saw nothing but honest concern in his face. "Why would you do that? You could be in Cheyenne in a few days finding real work that pays real money." "Because you need help, and I can give it," Tom said simply. "Because I know what it is like to be alone and struggling, and I would not wish that on anyone. And because, if I am being honest, it might do me good to stop drifting for a while, to have a purpose beyond just moving from place to place. I have been running for 5 years and I'm tired. Maybe it is time to stop and be useful to someone." There were a dozen reasons Sarah should refuse. She barely knew this man, and propriety dictated that she should not have an unmarried man living on her property. But propriety seemed like a luxury she could not afford, and Tom had already proven himself trustworthy in the way that mattered most. He had mourned with her, shared her grief, and asked nothing in return. "All right," she said, "you can stay for a while. I cannot pay you, but I can feed you and provide shelter, and I would be grateful for the help." Relief crossed Tom's face, and Sarah realized he had genuinely wanted this, had needed it perhaps as much as she did. They shook hands on the arrangement, and then Tom set about assessing what work needed to be done. Over the following days, Sarah watched as Tom transformed her property. He patched the gaps in the shack walls, replaced broken shingles on the roof, reinforced the lean-to until it was a proper small shelter. He chopped wood until she had a supply that would last through the rest of winter, and he repaired the stove so it drew properly and heated more efficiently. Every evening he came in for dinner, and they would sit at the small table and talk. Sarah learned that Tom was originally from Austin, that he had 2 younger sisters he had not seen in years, that he missed them but could not bring himself to go back to Texas because too many memories waited there. He told her about the cattle drives he had worked, the long, dusty months moving hundreds of head north to rail towns, the camaraderie of the trail, and the loneliness of the campfire. He spoke of his daughter Emma with a mixture of love and pain, describing how she had loved horses and butterflies and songs, how her laughter had been the best sound in the world. In turn, Sarah told Tom about her life before Deadwood. She had been a school teacher in Ohio, teaching reading and arithmetic to children in a one-room schoolhouse. She had met Jacob at a church social, had been charmed by his enthusiasm and optimism, his absolute certainty that if they went west, they could build a better life. She had given up her teaching position and married him within 3 months, and they had set out for Dakota Territory full of hope and determination. "He was a good man," Sarah said one evening, staring into her coffee cup. "Maybe too optimistic, maybe not practical enough, but good. He worked hard and he loved me and he was excited about the baby. When he died, I felt like my future died with him. And then when the baby died too, I had no future at all. Just an empty present that stretched on forever." "You are still young," Tom said gently. "You will have a future, even if you cannot see it yet." "Will I? What kind of future is there for a widow with no money and no prospects?" "The kind you make for yourself. It might not be the future you planned, but that does not mean it cannot be good." Sarah wanted to believe him, but belief felt like something that belonged to a different person, someone who still had hope. She was not that person anymore. As weeks passed and Sarah's body healed, she found herself drawn outside more often, standing by the small grave with the wooden cross. Sometimes Tom joined her there, and they would stand in companionable silence, each lost in their own memories of children who should have lived. Other times Sarah went alone, talking to the baby she had never held, telling stories about Jacob and their life together, sharing the small details of her days as though the child could hear. "I wish I had named you," she said one afternoon, the sun bright on the snow that still covered the ground. "The midwife said there was no point in naming a baby who never drew breath, but that feels wrong. You deserve a name. You deserve to be remembered as a person, not just a loss." She thought about it for a while, then said, "I'm going to call you Grace. That was my mother's name, and it is beautiful, and you should have something beautiful to carry into whatever comes after this life. Grace McKenna. You were loved, and you mattered, and I will never forget you." Saying the name aloud made it real in a way nothing else had. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, but they were different from the desperate, drowning tears of those first days. These were tears of acknowledgement, of honoring a life that had been too brief but had existed nonetheless. When she returned to the shack, Tom was there, and she told him what she had done. Her name was Grace, she said. I needed her to have a name. Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. Grace is a beautiful name. Emma would have liked it. Something about the way he said it, linking the two children across time and loss, made Sarah's heart ache in a different way. This man had been through his own hell and come out the other side still capable of kindness and compassion. He worked hard every day, asked for nothing beyond food and shelter, and treated her with a respect and gentleness that made her feel human again after weeks of feeling like a ghost. One evening in March, as the weather began to slowly warm and hints of spring appeared in the longer days and occasional patches of bare ground, Tom sat at the table longer than usual after dinner. He seemed troubled, working up the courage to say something, and finally Sarah asked, "What is on your mind?" "I have been thinking about what comes next," Tom said slowly. "This shack is in good shape now, and you are healing, and soon it will be time for me to move on. That was always the plan, but I find myself not wanting to leave, and I need to know if that is because I genuinely care about what happens to you or because I am just avoiding my own problems by focusing on yours." Sarah felt her heart skip. She had been deliberately not thinking about Tom leaving because the thought of being alone again was terrifying. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay," Tom admitted. "I want to keep helping you, keep being here. But I do not want to overstay my welcome or make you uncomfortable, and I do not want you to feel obligated to let me stay just because I helped you when you were at your lowest." "You are not making me uncomfortable," Sarah said carefully. "The truth is, I do not want you to leave either. These past weeks have been bearable because you were here. I know that probably sounds pathetic, clinging to someone I barely know, but it is the truth." "It does not sound pathetic. It sounds human." Tom met her eyes across the table. "I care about you, Sarah. I think I started caring that first day when I saw you standing out there holding Grace, looking like the loneliest person in the world. And the more time I spend with you, the more I care. But I need to know if that is something you might welcome or if I should pack up and ride out before I say something that ruins this." Sarah's mind was racing. She had not let herself think of Tom as anything more than a helper, a temporary presence in her life, because thinking beyond that felt like a betrayal of Jacob's memory. But Jacob was gone, and Grace was gone, and she was still alive, and Tom was here, solid and real, and looking at her with something in his eyes that made her feel things she thought had died with her husband. "I do not know what I feel," Sarah said honestly. "I loved Jacob, and he has only been dead 4 months. And I feel guilty even considering anything else, but I also know that you make me feel less alone, and when I think about you leaving, it hurts in a way I did not expect. I do not know if that is just fear of being alone, or if it is something more." "Then let me stay a while longer, Sis-D," Tom said, "not as hired help, but as someone who wants to be here. Let us see what this is without rushing or forcing anything. If it turns into something, good. If not, we will part as friends, and you will at least have had time to figure out what you want to do next." It was a reasonable proposition, perhaps too reasonable, but Sarah found herself nodding. "All right, you can stay." The relief on Tom's face was unmistakable, and Sarah felt an answering warmth in her chest. Maybe this was wrong. Maybe she was moving too fast, but maybe it was also a chance at something good after so much grief and loss. As spring arrived in earnest, the landscape transformed from frozen white to muddy brown to the first tentative green. Tom helped Sarah plant a small garden, and they worked side by side in the dirt, talking and laughing and slowly building something that felt like companionship evolving into friendship, evolving into something deeper. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tom reached over and took Sarah's hand. She let him, and they sat there connected by that simple touch. not saying anything because words would have been inadequate. Sarah felt her heart opening despite her determination to keep it closed, felt hope creeping back in despite everything that had tried to kill it. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Tom said quietly, still looking at the sunset. "I did not plan it, did not expect it, but it is happening anyway. I understand if you are not ready for that, if you need more time, or if you can never feel the same way because of what you have lost. I just wanted you to know. Because I'm tired of running from things and I'm trying to be brave enough to face them instead." Sarah tightened her grip on his hand. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me because I do not want to lose anyone else. I do not think I could survive it." "You cannot live your life afraid of loss," Tom said gently. "I know that is easy to say and hard to believe, but it is true. Emma died, and I wanted to die too, but I did not, and eventually I found my way back to something like living. You will too, and maybe we can find our way together." Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had appeared when she needed him most, who had mourned with her and stayed with her, and somehow made her believe that there might be reasons to keep going. "I want to try," she said. "I want to see where this goes." Tom smiled, and it transformed his face from weathered to beautiful. He leaned over and kissed her gently, and Sarah let herself kiss him back, let herself feel something besides grief for the first time in months. It was tentative and careful, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole again, but it was real, and it was theirs. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. Tom took work at nearby ranches when he could find it, contributing money to their household, and Sarah began taking in laundry and mending from other settlers, using her neat stitching to earn what she could. It was not much, but together they managed better than either could have alone. They talked about the future carefully, not making grand plans but allowing themselves to imagine possibilities. Tom spoke of maybe starting a small ranch, just a few head of cattle and some horses, building something stable instead of drifting from job to job. Sarah talked about maybe teaching again if there were ever enough children in the area to warrant a school, about wanting to use her education for something meaningful. In June, Tom asked Sarah to marry him. They were standing by Grace's grave, which had become a place they visited together regularly, bringing wildflowers in summer and speaking softly about the child who had brought them together in the strangest, saddest way. "I know it has not been long," Tom said, holding both her hands in his. "And I know you are still mourning Jacob and Grace. But I love you, Sarah, and I want to build a life with you. I want to honor what you have lost while also creating something new. Will you marry me?" Sarah looked at the small cross Tom had built all those months ago, thought about how he had mourned with her when he had no obligation to do so, how he had stayed and helped and loved her through the darkest time of her life. Jacob would have wanted her to be happy, would have wanted her to live fully instead of just surviving. And Grace, sweet Grace who never drew breath, had somehow brought this good man into her life. "Yes," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in August by a traveling preacher with a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Tom had bought in Deadwood, and Tom wore his best shirt and looked nervous and happy in equal measure. It was nothing like Sarah's first wedding, which had been a proper church affair with family and friends, but it felt right in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with the love that had grown between them. That night, in the small shack that was now their home, Tom held Sarah gently and told her he would spend the rest of his life trying to make her happy. Sarah believed him because he had already proven himself in the ways that mattered most. They made the shack more comfortable, adding small touches that turned it from a place of survival into a home. Tom built proper furniture to replace the rough pieces Jacob had made, and Sarah sewed curtains and cushions that softened the harsh edges. They worked Tom's claim when they could, though it yielded little, and Tom took regular work at the larger ranches nearby, building a reputation as a reliable hand and skilled horseman. Life was not easy. Winters in Dakota Territory were brutal, and money was always tight, but they had each other, and that made the hardships bearable. They talked about everything, shared their fears and hopes and memories of the people they had lost. Tom told Sarah more about Emma, about his failed marriage and his years of drifting, and Sarah told him about her parents and her brother and the life she had imagined with Jacob. "Do you think they would approve?" Sarah asked one evening, meaning Jacob and Emma and all the people they had loved and lost. "Do you think they would be glad we found each other?" "I think they would want us to be happy," Tom said. "And I think they would understand that loving someone new does not mean forgetting someone old. The heart has room for all of it, grief and love and memory and hope. We do not have to choose." In the spring of 1878, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, because she could not forget what had happened with Grace, could not shake the fear that history would repeat itself. Tom held her while she cried and promised he would be there every step of the way, whatever happened. "We will get through this together," he said firmly. "If everything goes well, we will have a child to love and raise. If it does not, we will mourn together like we did before, and we will survive because we know we can. Either way, you are not alone." The pregnancy progressed slowly, and Sarah was terrified every single day. Every twinge made her panic. Every moment without movement sent her into spirals of fear. Tom was patient and steady, talking her down from her worst anxieties, reminding her that this pregnancy was different. She was healthier and stronger and not alone. They brought in the midwife early, a different woman than the one who had attended Grace's birth, and she examined Sarah thoroughly and declared everything looked good. "You are strong, Mrs. Brennan," she said. "Your body knows what to do. Try to trust it." Trust was hard, but Sarah tried. She rested when she was supposed to, ate well, let Tom handle the heavy work. As the months passed and her belly grew round and tight, she allowed herself small moments of hope, imagining holding a baby that cried and breathed and lived. In December, 3 weeks before Christmas, Sarah went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that had her screaming and crying and begging for it to be over. Tom stayed with her despite the midwife's protests that men should not be present for such things, holding Sarah's hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth and telling her she was strong and brave and almost there. When the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a loud, indignant wail, Sarah burst into tears of pure relief. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Tom was crying too, unashamed, and when the midwife placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in Sarah's arms, they both stared down at him in wonder. He was red-faced and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, his tiny hands waving in the air, his eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with her finger. The baby's fingers closed around hers reflexively, and Sarah felt her heart expand with love so fierce it was almost painful. "Hello, Jacob Thomas. Welcome to the world." They had decided on the name weeks ago, honoring both the father Sarah had lost and the man who had become her husband and partner. Tom kissed Sarah's forehead, then the baby's, his face wet with tears. "He is beautiful. You did so well. I am so proud of you." The midwife bustled around, checking Sarah and the baby, declaring both healthy and strong. "You have a fine son, Mrs. Brennan. He is a fighter, that one. You can tell by how loud he complains." Baby Jacob did complain loudly and often those first weeks, crying for milk and comfort and attention. Sarah was exhausted in a way she had never experienced, but it was a good exhaustion, born of caring for a living child instead of mourning a lost one. Tom helped however he could, walking the baby when Sarah needed rest, changing soiled cloths without complaint, staring at his son with an expression of awe and love that made Sarah fall in love with him all over again. "I did not think I would get to be a father again," Tom said one night. holding Jacob while Sarah tried to eat dinner. After Emma died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never imagined I would have another chance. You are a wonderful father, Sarah said, watching him rock the baby with practiced ease. He is lucky to have you. We are both lucky, Tom corrected, lucky to have survived long enough to find each other. Lucky to have this. As Jacob grew from newborn to infant, the shack filled with sounds of life instead of grief. There was laughter and crying in the soft songs Sarah sang while nursing, the rumble of Tom's voice reading aloud in the evenings. They were building a family, weaving together strands of love and loss and hope into something strong and enduring. On a cold February day in 1879, they bundled up Jacob in his warmest clothes and walked together to Grace's grave. The cross still stood firm, weathered now but solid, and Sarah placed a small bouquet of dried flowers at its base. "This is your sister Grace," Sarah said softly, holding Jacob so he could see the grave, even though he was too young to understand. "She never got to meet you, but I think she would have loved you very much. I think about her every day, and I will tell you about her as you grow up. So you will know you had a sister who mattered." Tom put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, and they stood there together. A family shaped by loss, but defined by love. "Thank you, Grace," Tom said quietly, "for bringing your mother and me together, for teaching us that we could survive grief and find joy again. You will always be part of this family." Jacob made a soft cooing sound, and Sarah smiled through her tears. Life was strange and sad and beautiful, full of endings and beginnings tangled so thoroughly you could not separate them. She had lost so much, but she had also found so much, and standing there between the grave of one child and the living warmth of another, Sarah felt a profound gratitude for all of it. The years that followed were full of the ordinary struggles and joys of frontier life. Tom's reputation as a skilled cowboy grew, and he found steady work that paid better than the odd jobs he had taken initially. They saved money slowly but steadily, talking about buying land and starting that small ranch Tom had dreamed of. Sarah taught Jacob his letters and numbers, delighting in his quick mind and endless curiosity. He grew into a sturdy, cheerful child with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. In 1881, Sarah became pregnant again, and this time the fear was less overwhelming because she had Jacob as proof that things could go right. The pregnancy was easier than her first two, and in the spring of 1882 she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Emma Grace, honoring both children who had been lost. Tom wept when he held his daughter for the first time, and Sarah knew he was thinking of his first Emma, the little girl who had died of fever so long ago. "She would be happy you used her name," Sarah said, watching Tom cradle the baby with infinite gentleness. "She would be glad to know she is remembered." "They both are," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. "Grace and Emma, they are both part of this family even though they are not here. Their love is woven into ours." Emma Grace was a placid baby, content to watch the world with wide, solemn eyes. Jacob was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Sarah's heart swelled watching her son learn to be gentle and protective. By 1883, Tom had saved enough to make a down payment on a small parcel of land with good grazing and a creek running through it. It was not much, just a few hundred acres, but it was theirs, and they built a modest house with their own hands, larger than the shack, but still simple. They moved in that fall, and Sarah felt like they were finally building the stable life they had both dreamed of. Tom bought a small herd of cattle and some horses, working long days to build fences and tend the animals, while Sarah managed the house and garden and children. It was hard work, exhausting work, but it was theirs, and they were building something that would last. Jacob grew tall and strong, learning to ride almost as soon as he could walk, following his father everywhere and absorbing everything Tom could teach him about horses and cattle and the land. Emma Grace was quieter but equally determined, helping her mother with cooking and sewing and showing an early aptitude for reading that delighted Sarah. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Sarah and Tom would sit on the porch of their house and watched the stars wheel overhead. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, about maybe hiring help as the children grew older and could contribute less time to chores because they needed education. "Do you ever miss teaching?" Tom asked one night. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But I teach Jacob and Emma every day, and that feels important. Maybe when they are older and we have more stability, I could teach other children too. I would like that." "You would be good at it. You are patient and smart, and you love learning. Any child would be lucky to have you as a teacher." Sarah leaned her head on Tom's shoulder, feeling content in a way she had never expected to feel again after those dark days in 1877. "I never thought I would be this happy again," she said quietly. "When I lost Jacob and Grace, I genuinely believed my life was over. And then you appeared, and you mourned with me, and you helped me find reasons to keep living. You saved me, Tom." "We saved each other," Tom corrected. "I was just drifting, running from my grief and accomplishing nothing. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build something real. I am grateful every day that I happened to be riding past your shack that morning. It was the luckiest moment of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, two people who had found each other in the midst of terrible loss and built something beautiful from the ashes of grief. The ranch might be small, and their life might be hard, but it was theirs, earned through work and love, and the determination to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. In 1885, their family grew again with the birth of another son, whom they named William after Tom's father. He was a robust baby with a loud cry and his mother's dark hair, and he fit into their family as though he had always been there. Jacob and Emma adored their new brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. There were good years with strong calves and fair prices, and lean years when drought or disease threatened everything they had built. Through it all, Sarah and Tom worked side by side, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating victories together. They never forgot the children they had lost. Every year on the anniversary of Grace's death, they visited her grave, which they had moved to their new property, placing flowers and telling her about her siblings and how the family had grown. They spoke of Emma too, Tom's first daughter, making sure Jacob and Emma, Grace, and William knew they had sisters in heaven who were loved and remembered. As their children grew older, Sarah began teaching other children in the area, holding classes in their front room during the winter months when ranch work slowed. She loved watching young minds grasp new concepts, loved fostering curiosity and learning. Tom was proud of her, telling everyone who would listen about his wife, the teacher. Jacob grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father, talking about expanding the ranch and maybe buying adjacent land. Emma Grace developed a passion for music, somehow acquiring an old fiddle and teaching herself to play with determined practice. William was still young but showed signs of being a natural leader, organizing the other children and always coming up with elaborate games and plans. In the spring of 1889, Sarah stood on the porch of their house watching her family move around the ranch yard. Tom was working with Jacob to break a new horse, both of them moving with the easy confidence of experienced horsemen. Emma Grace sat under a tree practicing her fiddle, the notes sweet and clear in the afternoon air. William was playing with the ranch dogs, his laughter bright and joyful. Sarah put a hand on her belly where a fourth child was growing, due in the fall. She was 34 years old, healthy and strong, surrounded by love and life. It had been 12 years since that terrible February when she had lost Grace and felt like her life was ending. 12 years since a stranger named Tom Brennan had stopped to help a grieving woman and changed both their lives forever. She thought about the cross Tom had built, the grave he had dug, the tears he had shed for a child he had never known. She thought about how he had mourned with her when he had no obligation to do so, how that act of compassion had been the beginning of everything good that had followed. Tom looked up from the horse and saw her watching. He smiled, that same warm smile that had gradually thawed the ice around her heart all those years ago, and waved. Sarah waved back, her heart full of gratitude and love and hope. Life had been hard and sad and beautiful, full of losses that still ached when she let herself remember them fully. But it had also been full of unexpected joys, of love found in the midst of grief, of a family built from brokenness and made whole through determination and care. Grace would always be part of their story, the tiny soul whose brief existence had brought Sarah and Tom together. Emma, too, the first daughter Tom had loved and lost. They lived on in memory and in the way they had shaped the people who mourned them, teaching hard lessons about the fragility of life and the resilience of the human heart. As the sun began to set, painting the Dakota sky in shades of gold and rose, Sarah called her family in for dinner. They gathered around the table, talking and laughing and arguing good-naturedly the way families do. And Sarah looked at each beloved face and felt overwhelmingly blessed. Tom caught her eye across the table and smiled, and Sarah knew he was thinking the same thing she was. They had survived. They had built a life worth living. They had honored their losses while embracing their joys. They had mourned and loved and persevered, and they had done it together. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah and Tom lay in bed talking softly about plans for the new baby, about expanding the ranch, about the future they were still building one day at a time. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Stopping that day, getting involved with a stranger's grief? Your life would have been simpler if you had just kept riding." Tom pulled her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. "I have never regretted it for a single moment. That day changed my life, gave me a reason to stop running and start living again. I found you, and through you I found myself again. I found purpose and love and a family I never thought I would have. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you," Sarah whispered. "I will love you until the day I die, and even after that, if there's anything after. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You showed me that grief and joy can exist together, that loss does not have to be the end of everything. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Tom said again, because it was true and important and bore repeating. "We built this together, from grief and hope and love, and we will keep building it for as long as we live." Sarah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. The past was painful, but it had led her here, to this man, and this family, and this life. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together just as they had faced everything else. In the darkness of their room, in a small ranch house in Dakota Territory, two people who had found each other in the midst of terrible loss held each other close and dreamed of tomorrow. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to human suffering and human joy, but witnessing both nonetheless. And in a small grave on the hillside, beneath a weathered wooden cross, Grace McKenna rested in peace, her brief life having mattered more than anyone could have imagined, the catalyst for a love story that would span decades and shape a family that would honor her memory forever. The years continued to unfold with all their challenges and triumphs, and Sarah and Tom grew old together, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, their love deepening with time into something profound and unshakable. They never forgot where they had started, never took for granted the miracle of having found each other when both were lost and broken. And they taught their children and grandchildren about Grace and Emma, making sure those precious souls were remembered and honored as part of the family story. Proof that love can survive even the darkest losses and emerge stronger on the other side.